You know that feeling you get when you're standing among ancient ruins, in the skeleton of a city, maybe? It's this incredible mix of awe and sadness. Think about the Colosseum or those vine covered Mayan temples. The world is just full of them. And the source material we're looking at today puts it in this really powerful way. Yeah, that line really hits you, doesn't it? It completely reframes these quiet, crumbling places. They're not just relics of what was, but, well, they're memorials to a future that never got to happen. And that, right there, forces us to ask a really deep, kind of unsettling question. So, why do great societies fall? And maybe more importantly, what can their stories teach us about our own lives right now? Okay, let's dive in. For the next few minutes, we're going to let the ruins of history be our guide. We're going to explore why civilizations that seemed totally invincible just vanished. And we'll see if we can hear any echoes of their collapse in our world today. So, we're starting here, where the future was canceled. And before we get into the how and why of collapse, I think it's really important to understand the what. I mean, what does it really mean to stand in a place where the future was just canceled? That feeling you get. It's universal, it's timeless. This idea is pretty central to what we're talking about. A ruin is a total paradox, right? On one hand, it shows you the incredible, fearsome power of time, how everything crumbles. But at the same time, it's still standing. It's defying that power. It creates this, I don't know, this imaginary space. You can't help it. When you walk through these places, your mind just starts filling in the gaps. You almost hear the footsteps. You picture the people who live there. It's just this powerful, kind of haunting reminder that history is definitely not just a straight line of endless progress. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit. We've talked about the feeling, the philosophy of it all. Now let's get a bit more analytical. Let's look at the anatomy of collapse. Because if we really want to understand it, we need to be clear on what we actually mean by that word. So this is super important. When we say collapse, we're not just talking about an empire falling or a change in government, like when the Soviet Union ended. No, this is something way more fundamental. It's a society-wide breakdown. It's when people actually abandon their cities, the whole social fabric just disintegrates, and the structure of daily life completely falls apart. And what's really fascinating is that when historians and archaeologists look at all these different collapses across time and space, they see the same patterns pop up again and again. You can almost think of this list as a kind of diagnostic toolkit for a civilization in trouble. We're talking about things like uncontrollable climate change, staggering social inequality, trade networks completely falling apart, destructive wars with neighbors, and this one's key, a total inability to change course even when things are obviously going wrong. And these aren't just separate problems. They usually feed on each other, creating a kind of perfect storm. Okay, so with that toolkit in mind, let's travel back in time. Let's look at some echoes from the past, because these aren't just cool stories, right? They're actual case studies that show those themes we just talked about playing out in stark, terrifying reality. Just listen to this quote from historian Robert Drews. Within a period of 40 or 50 years, almost every significant city in the Eastern Mediterranean world was destroyed, many of them never to be occupied again. Let that sink in for a second. 40 or 50 years. He's talking about the late Bronze Age collapse, around 1200 BCE. This was the world of the powerful Hittite Empire, the Mycenaean Greeks from the Trojan War stories. These were huge, literate, deeply interconnected societies, and they were just wiped off the map with terrifying speed. So the question is, what on earth happened? Well, it's a perfect example of that disintegrating trade networks problem. See, the whole Bronze Age world was built on, well, bronze. And to make bronze, you need two things, copper and tin. The problem was, those metals often came from opposite ends of the known world. So they had this incredibly complex, globalized economy that all depended on just a few key shipping lanes. It was their greatest strength. But then, a perfect storm of drought, mass migrations, and warfare hit. And those supply lines were severed. And when that happened, their entire world just shattered. Okay, now let's jump across the world and forward in time to the Americas. We're talking about the classic Maya. These incredible cities, their mind-bendingly advanced knowledge of astronomy. Their problem wasn't a fragile supply chain for bronze. Nope. Their biggest threat came directly from the sky. Minus 40%. That is a massive number. That's the reduction in rainfall that scientists think the Yucatan Peninsula experienced. And it wasn't just a bad year. It was a mega drought that lasted for centuries. In fact, it was the worst drought that region had seen in 7,000 years.
For the Maya, with their huge population centers that absolutely depended on really sophisticated water management systems, a change this big was basically an unsolvable crisis. It was just this slow, grinding environmental catastrophe that completely unraveled their entire society. And then there's this image. It's gotta be one of the most haunting symbols of collapse anywhere on Earth. On Easter Island, the Rapa Nui people pushed their tiny, isolated ecosystem right to the breaking point, and then past it. They cut down almost all their trees, in large part to build and move these massive statues. And this one here, this unfinished moai, still stuck in the quarry, it just perfectly captures that theme we talked about. The inability to change a failing course. It's like a monument to an ambition that literally consumed the very world that dreamed it up. So after all that, you have to ask, what's the point? Why look at all these ghosts from the past? Well, the point is to see if their stories hold up a mirror, to see if we can see our own reflection in their ruins. The big question is it our turn to listen? And when you put it side by side like this, the connections are, well, they're kind of alarming. Look at the Bronze Age, fragile trade routes for metals collapse. Now look at us, fragile global supply chains for things like semiconductors and energy. Or think about the Maya. A prolonged, severe drought triggers a total societal breakdown. And today, we're already seeing how climate pressure is a major factor in conflicts from Syria all the way to the Sahel. The parallels are hard to ignore. There's this famous quote by William Gibson. The future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. People usually say that when they're talking about cool new technology, right? But in this context, it takes on a much darker meaning. All these pressures we've been talking about, climate stress, resources running out, social instability, this isn't some sci-fi apocalypse that might happen one day. For millions and millions of people living in fragile parts of the world right now, collapse isn't a future possibility. It's their daily reality. And I think that brings us to the final and maybe most important takeaway. It's summed up perfectly in this quote by Sven Lindquist. It is not knowledge we lack. What is missing is the courage to understand what we know and to draw conclusions. Think about it. The people of the past, they didn't know they were living at the end of their world. They couldn't see the cliff they were walking towards. But us, we're different. We have their stories. We have the data. We can see the patterns. So the real question the ruins leave us with is, do we have the courage to act on what we know?